London, 1887. 22-year-old Eliza Hawthorne stood 3 days from marrying England's most powerful duke until she overheard the devastating truth in the garden. Victor Langley didn't love her. He needed her fortune. Worse, he was entangled with her own cousin. In that shattering moment, a society girl raised to obey made the most dangerous choice of her life. She ran. She abandoned everything: name, reputation, future, fleeing to a rugged coastal estate where a mysterious earl offered something London never would: freedom. But when scandal erupted and Victor came hunting, Eliza faced her ultimate test. Would she surrender or fight for the life she deserved? Stay with us until the end to see how this scandalous choice changed everything. Drop a like and comment which city you're watching from. The chandelier crystals caught the afternoon light, scattering diamonds across the drawing room walls of the Hawthorne estate. Eliza stood motionless before the full-length mirror while 3 seamstresses circled her like attentive moths, pinning and tucking the ivory silk that would become her wedding gown. The fabric whispered against her skin. Expensive, imported, perfect. Everything was perfect. That was precisely the problem. "Arms up, Miss Hawthorne," the head seamstress murmured, her mouth bristling with pins. Eliza complied automatically, watching her reflection shift in the glass. The girl staring back looked like a porcelain doll, blonde curls arranged just so, blue eyes wide and empty, posture flawless from years of deportment training. 22 years old, and she'd never made a single choice that mattered. Not the books she read, not the friends she kept, certainly not the man she would marry in 3 days' time. "You'll be the most beautiful bride London has seen in a generation," her mother declared from the velvet settee, where she sat reviewing seating charts with the wedding coordinator. Margaret Hawthorne didn't look up from her papers. She never really looked at Eliza anymore, just through her, seeing instead the social triumph this marriage represented. "Thank you, Mother." The words came out hollow. "The Duke's family has confirmed their guest list. 247 attendees, including 3 members of Parliament and Lord Ashford's entire contingent from the north." Her mother's voice rang with satisfaction. "This wedding will be talked about for years." For all the wrong reasons, Eliza thought, but didn't say. She'd learned early that her thoughts were dangerous things, best kept locked away where no one could judge them. The seamstresses stepped back, admiring their work. The gown transformed her into exactly what society demanded: a beautiful, silent ornament for a powerful man's arm. Eliza forced herself to smile, and the reflection smiled back. A perfect, practiced lie. "We're finished for today, Miss Hawthorne," the head seamstress said. "The final fitting will be tomorrow morning." As the women gathered their supplies and departed, Eliza's mother finally looked up. "Your father wants to speak with you before dinner. He's in his study." A summons, not an invitation. Eliza nodded and left the drawing room, her afternoon dress rustling against the polished marble floors. The Hawthorne manor stretched around her like a beautiful prison: 18 rooms of imported furnishings, oil paintings by masters, and suffocating expectations. She found her father behind his massive oak desk, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence. Jonathan Hawthorne looked up as she entered, and for just a moment, something like regret flickered across his weathered face. "Close the door, Eliza." She obeyed, settling into the chair opposite him with the grace drilled into her since childhood. Her father studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "I suppose you know why I've called you here." "The wedding arrangements?" she ventured. "The financial arrangements." He pushed a leather portfolio across the desk. "Your dowry has been finalized. £50,000 plus the estate in Hampshire and the shipping interest your grandfather left you." Eliza's hands remained folded in her lap, though her heart had begun to pound. £50,000. She'd known she came with a substantial dowry. All aristocratic marriages were business transactions, but hearing the number spoken aloud made something twist in her chest. "That's generous." Her father's laugh held no humor. "It's necessary. The Duke of Langley doesn't marry for love, Eliza. Men of his position rarely do. But he's agreed to take you, and in return, our family gains access to circles we could never reach otherwise. Your future children will have royal connections. Your mother will host parties that matter. Your brothers will receive appointments they'd never earn on merit alone. Each word landed like a stone. And what will I receive, Father? Security, status, a title that opens every door in England. He leaned forward, his voice softening slightly. I know this isn't the romantic fairy tale you might have imagined as a girl, but you're a woman now, and women of our class understand that love is a luxury we cannot afford. Duty, Eliza. That's what we give our families. Even if it costs us everything else? Her father's expression hardened. What else is there? You think you'd be happier poor, struggling, married to some clerk who could barely afford to feed you? He shook his head. You've been raised for this. Your education, your training, every moment of your life has prepared you to be a duchess. Don't let childish fantasies ruin the opportunity of a lifetime. Eliza rose slowly, smoothing her skirts. Of course, Father, you're right. The lie came easily. She'd been practicing for years. She left the study and made her way through the corridors, past servants preparing for tomorrow's pre-wedding dinner, past rooms filled with gifts from well-wishers she'd never met. The manor felt smaller with each step, the walls pressing closer. Fresh air. She needed air. The garden sprawled behind the estate, 3 acres of manicured hedges, rose beds, and marble fountains. Eliza slipped through the French doors and followed the gravel path toward her favorite spot, a secluded bench beneath an ancient oak tree, hidden from the house by a wall of flowering jasmine. She'd just settled onto the weathered wood when voices drifted over the hedge. Male and female, pitched low in conversation. Eliza started to rise. She had no desire to intrude on someone else's private moment, but froze when she recognized the man's voice. Victor Langley, her fiancé. You're asking too much, Beatrice. His tone carried an edge Eliza had never heard before. In her presence, the Duke was always perfectly controlled, his words measured and appropriate. This version of him sounded impatient. I'm asking for what you promised. The woman, Beatrice, spoke with barely contained fury. You said after the wedding, after you secured her fortune, we could be together properly. The world tilted. Eliza gripped the bench, her fingernails digging into old wood. And we will be, Victor assured her. But you must be patient. The Hawthorne girl brings £50,000 in connections to the shipping industry. Once the marriage is legally binding, once her assets are transferred to my control, I can afford to keep you in the manner you deserve. A house and bath, an allowance. Everything we discussed. A kept woman, Beatrice spat. That's what you're offering me after everything? What did you expect? Victor's voice turned cold. You're a cousin to the bride, a poor relation with no dowry and no prospects. I need money, Beatrice. The dukedom is drowning in debt. My father's gambling and my brother's poor investments have left the estate mortgaged to the hilt. Eliza Hawthorne is my solution, not my choice. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of Eliza's heart shattering. Beatrice spoke again, her voice thick with tears. Do you feel anything for her at all? I feel gratitude for her ignorance. Victor laughed, and the sound was cruel. The girl is perfectly trained, obedient, quiet, exactly what a duke's wife should be. She'll never question me, never challenge me. She'll produce heirs and host dinner parties and look beautiful on my arm, and in return I'll save my family from ruin. And me? Beatrice whispered. You, my dear, will have everything money can buy, just not my name. Footsteps crunched on gravel, moving away. Now compose yourself. The pre-wedding dinner is tomorrow, and we can't have anyone suspecting. Their voices faded. Eliza sat frozen on the bench, jasmine perfume suddenly cloying in the spring air. Her mind raced through every interaction she'd ever had with Victor. 3 months of courtship, each moment now revealed as performance. The way he'd held her hand and called her beautiful. The way he'd smiled at her father while discussing the marriage settlement. The way he'd kissed her cheek after the engagement announcement, his lips cold and perfunctory. All of it had been a lie. And Beatrice. Sweet, quiet Beatrice. Her mother's niece, living with them since her own parents died 3 years ago. The girl who'd helped Eliza choose her wedding flowers, who'd laughed and cried with her over wedding plans, who'd braided her hair just this morning while chattering about how lucky Eliza was. The betrayal cut deeper than Victor's schemes. She'd trusted Beatrice, loved her like a sister. Eliza stood on shaking legs and made her way back to the house through a side entrance, avoiding the main rooms where preparations continued. She climbed the servants' stairs to her bedroom and locked the door behind her. The room mocked her with its careful preparations. Her trousseau hung in the wardrobe, gowns and nightdresses for her new life as a duchess. Her jewelry box sat on the vanity, filled with Hawthorne heirlooms she'd wear to formal events. On her writing desk, a stack of thank you notes waited to be written, addressed to people she'd never met who'd sent gifts for a marriage built on fraud. Eliza walked to the window and looked out over the London streets. Carriages rattled past, gas lamps beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, people made real choices, fell in real love, built real lives. Not here, not in this gilded cage where she was nothing but currency. Her reflection stared back from the darkening window glass, that same porcelain doll, perfect and empty. 22 years old, and she'd never made a single choice that mattered. Until now. The thought came quietly, but it resonated through her entire body. What if she didn't go through with it? What if she refused to be the obedient solution to Victor's financial problems? What if she chose something different, anything different, from this carefully scripted future? The idea was insane, suicidal even. A woman of her class who broke an engagement didn't just face scandal, she faced social annihilation. Her family would be ruined. She'd be ruined. No respectable man would ever marry her. She'd spend the rest of her life as a cautionary tale, whispered about at parties she'd never again attend. But as Eliza stood at that window, watching London's evening unfold, a strange calm settled over her. Ruin, she realized, might be preferable to this slow suffocation. Scandal might hurt less than a lifetime married to a man who saw her as nothing but a bank account with a pretty face. She crossed to her wardrobe and pulled out her simplest traveling dress, dark blue wool, practical, and unremarkable. From the bottom drawer of her dresser, she retrieved a small leather bag her grandmother had given her years ago. Hands moving with surprising steadiness, Eliza began to pack. Not much, just necessities. A change of clothes, toiletries, her mother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry small enough to sell without drawing attention. The book of poetry her tutor had given her when she was 16, the only object in this room she'd chosen herself. From her jewelry box, she took the modest amount of pin money she'd saved over the years. 12 pounds, 8 shillings, hardly enough to start a new life, but enough to buy train passage out of London. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was madness. She had no plan, no destination, no idea how a gently bred lady survived outside the protection of family and society. But the rational part of her mind had kept her trapped in this room, in this life, for 22 years. Maybe it was time to stop being rational. A knock at her door made Eliza's heart lurch. "Miss Hawthorne," the housekeeper's voice filtered through. "Your mother requests your presence in the drawing room. The florist has arrived with samples for tomorrow's arrangements." "I'll be down shortly," Eliza called, her voice remarkably steady. She heard the housekeeper's footsteps retreat. Moving quickly now, Eliza changed into the traveling dress and pinned her hair into a simple style. She tucked the packed bag under her bed. She'd retrieve it later, after the household had retired. One more evening, one more dinner playing the dutiful daughter, the blushing bride-to-be. Then, while London slept, Eliza Hawthorne would disappear. She descended the stairs to find her mother directing the florist with military precision, Beatrice hovering nearby with an expression of sweet concern that now made Eliza's stomach turn. "There you are, darling," her mother beamed. "Come help us decide between the roses and the peonies for your bouquet." "Whatever you think best, mother." Eliza smiled that perfect, practiced smile. "I trust your judgment completely." If her mother noticed anything off in her tone, she didn't show it. Margaret Hawthorne was too busy orchestrating her social triumph to see her daughter clearly. She'd never really seen Eliza at all. Dinner was an elaborate affair. Her parents, 3 of her father's business associates, and Beatrice, who kept casting Eliza sympathetic looks across the table. Eliza wanted to scream at her, to expose her in front of everyone, but she remained silent. Let them think her compliant. Let them believe the performance. "The Duke sends his regrets for missing tonight's gathering," her father announced over the soup course. "Pressing business at his estate, but he'll return tomorrow in time for the dinner." Pressing business, Eliza thought darkly, or pressing Beatrice in some hidden corner. She made it through 4 courses. through discussions of the wedding breakfast menu and the guest seating, and whether the string quartet or the small orchestra would be more appropriate for the reception. She nodded and smiled and let the conversation wash over her like water over stone. Finally, mercifully, her mother dismissed her. "You need your rest, darling. Tomorrow will be exhausting, and we can't have shadows under your eyes." Eliza climbed the stairs for the last time, closed her bedroom door, and waited. The house settled into nighttime quiet around 11. Servants finished their duties and retired to their quarters. Her parents' voices faded from the master bedroom down the hall. Beatrice's door clicked shut. At midnight, Eliza retrieved her bag from under the bed and changed into her traveling clothes. She penned a single note and left it on her pillow. "I cannot marry a man who doesn't love me. Please don't try to find me." Not an explanation, not an apology, just the truth, stark and simple. She slipped out through the servants' entrance, the same route she'd used earlier that day. The night air was cool against her face, carrying the scent of coal smoke and distant rain. London stretched around her, vast, indifferent, dangerous, and free. Eliza walked through the silent streets toward King's Cross Station, her heart pounding with terror and exhilaration in equal measure. She had no plan beyond getting out of the city, no destination except away. The station hummed with late-night activity, travelers catching overnight trains, porters loading luggage, vendors selling newspapers and meat pies to bleary-eyed passengers. Eliza approached the ticket window, trying to appear confident. "Where to, miss?" The clerk barely looked up. Good question. Where did ruined women go when they fled their lives? Eliza's eyes scanned the departure board, seeing names of cities and towns she'd only read about in books. Then one caught her eye. Blackmore-on-Sea, Cornwall. Departs 12:47. Cornwall. The far southwest corner of England, about as distant from London as one could get while remaining in the country. Remote, rural, the kind of place where a runaway bride might disappear. "Blackmore-on-Sea," she said firmly. "One way." The clerk quoted a price. Eliza counted out coins with trembling fingers, and he pushed a ticket across the counter. She clutched it like a lifeline and hurried to the platform. The train stood waiting, steam hissing from its engine. Eliza climbed aboard and found an empty third-class compartment. No sense wasting money on first-class luxury when she'd need every penny to survive. She settled onto the hard wooden bench and watched through the window as London began to recede. The train lurched forward, and with each mile the weight on Eliza's chest grew lighter. She was doing this. Actually doing this. Choosing herself over duty, over family, over everything she'd been raised to value. Terror should have consumed her. Instead, she felt something she'd never experienced before. Possibility. The countryside rolled past in darkness. Fields and forests, small villages with lights glowing in cottage windows. Hours passed. Eliza dozed fitfully, her head resting against the cold window glass, dreaming of gilded cages and men with cruel laughs. She woke to dawn breaking over the Cornish coast. The landscape had transformed completely. Gone were London's endless streets and England's gentle, cultivated countryside. Here, wild cliffs plunged into churning gray sea. Wind-bent trees clung to rocky outcroppings. Small stone houses huddled together against the elements, their chimneys trailing smoke into a vast, empty sky. It was harsh, unforgiving, beautiful. The train slowed as it approached Blackmore-on-Sea, a village that seemed to consist of one main street, a church, a handful of shops, and an inn. Eliza gathered her bag and stepped onto the platform, where morning wind cut through her traveling dress like knives. Only 3 other passengers disembarked, local people who knew where they were going, who belonged here. Eliza stood on the platform feeling utterly lost. "Miss, you'll be wanting the inn?" A boy of perhaps 14 approached, tipping his cap. His accent was thick, the local dialect making his words almost foreign. "Yes," Eliza managed. "Thank you." "Follow me, then. Mrs. Thorne runs a decent establishment. Clean rooms, fair prices." He led her up the cobbled street to a weathered building with a painted sign. The Broken Anchor. Despite the ominous name, the inn looked respectable enough. Eliza paid the boy a penny for his trouble and pushed through the heavy oak door. The common room was empty save for an older woman wiping down tables. She looked up as Eliza entered, her shrewd eyes taking in the expensive traveling dress, the small bag, the obvious displacement. "Need a room, do you?" "Please." Eliza approached the bar. "Just for tonight, possibly longer." Running from something or running to something? The directness startled her. In London, no one asked such questions. But this wasn't London, and Eliza was so tired of lying. "Running from," she admitted quietly. The woman nodded as if this made perfect sense. "6 shillings a night, meals included, name's Mrs. Thorne. You can call me Alice." "Elizabeth," Eliza said, using her full name for the first time in years. Not Eliza. That girl belonged to London, to her parents, to Victor. Elizabeth was someone new, someone undefined. "Well, Elizabeth, you look dead on your feet. Room's upstairs, first door on the right. I'll have Maggie bring up some breakfast." The room was small but clean, a narrow bed, a washstand, a single window overlooking the sea. Eliza set down her bag and crossed to the glass. The ocean stretched endlessly, wild and gray and free. Waves crashed against the cliffs with relentless force, each one an assertion of power that belonged to no one. Eliza pressed her palm against the cold window and let herself breathe fully for the first time in her life. She'd done it. She'd actually run. What happened next, she had no idea. But standing in that sparse room above a Cornish inn, watching the sea wage war against the land, Eliza felt something dangerous unfurl in her chest. Hope. 3 days passed before Eliza, Elizabeth now, ventured beyond the safety of the broken anchor. She spent those first 72 hours in a fog of exhaustion and disbelief, sleeping 14 hours at a stretch, waking to find meals Mrs. Thorne had left outside her door. The older woman seemed to understand that sometimes people needed time to become whoever they were running toward. On the 4th morning, Elizabeth woke to find her money pouch distressingly light. £12 had seemed like a fortune in London. Here, with room and board eating into it daily, she had perhaps 2 weeks before she'd be destitute. The reality settled over her like ice water. She'd run from her gilded cage, but she had no idea how to survive outside it. She dressed in her second traveling dress, plain gray wool, already showing wrinkles from being packed too tightly, and made her way downstairs. The common room held a handful of locals nursing morning ale, their conversation dying the moment she appeared. Suspicious eyes tracked her movement to a corner table. Mrs. Thorne brought over a plate of bread and cheese without being asked. "They'll get used to you," she said quietly. "Strangers are rare here, especially ones that arrive alone on midnight trains looking like they've seen ghosts. I suppose I must seem rather odd." "Odd's one word for it." Mrs. Thorne settled into the opposite chair, her weathered face kind despite the bluntness of her words. "You're educated, well-bred, running from something that scared you more than poverty and exile. That makes you either very brave or very foolish, and I haven't decided which yet." Elizabeth took a bite of bread to avoid answering. The cheese was sharp and local, nothing like the refined offerings at her mother's table. It tasted real. "I need work," she said finally. "I have some money, but not enough. Is there anything in the village? I can read and write. I'm good with numbers. I could perhaps teach, or—" Mrs. Thorne's laugh cut her off. "Teach? Girl, the village children work the farms and boats. Reading's a luxury for people with full bellies." She studied Elizabeth with those shrewd eyes. "Can you cook?" "No." "Clean?" "I've never—" Elizabeth trailed off, shame heating her cheeks. She'd been taught to arrange flowers and play piano and discuss literature in 3 languages. Utterly useless skills for survival. "Well," Mrs. Thorne stood brushing crumbs from her apron. "You'll learn then. I could use help around the inn. The work's hard and the pay's minimal, but it comes with room and board. You'd earn your keep." Pride warred with desperation. A Hawthorne scrubbing floors and changing linens? Her mother would die of mortification. But her mother wasn't here, and Elizabeth needed to eat. "I'll take it, thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You've never done real work in your life, have you? Your hands will bleed before the week's out." But Mrs. Thorne's eyes held something like approval. "Come on then. Might as well start now." The next 6 hours shattered every illusion Elizabeth had held about her own capability. Mrs. Thorne set her to scrubbing floors, actual scrubbing, on hands and knees with a brush and bucket of lye water that burned her skin. Her back screamed, her knees ached, blisters formed on her palms and burst and formed again. "You're doing it wrong," a voice said from behind her. Elizabeth looked up to find a girl of perhaps 17 watching with undisguised amusement. She had wild red hair and freckles scattered across her nose, her dress patched but clean. "I'm doing my best," Elizabeth managed, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Your best is terrible." The girl crouched beside her, taking the brush. "Like this, shorter strokes, more pressure. You're trying to be gentle with it, but dirt doesn't respond to manners." She demonstrated, her movements efficient and sure. "I'm Maggie. I work here too." "Elizabeth." "I know, the whole village knows." Maggie handed back the brush. "You're the mystery woman from London who ran away from something scandalous. Mrs. Patterson thinks you killed someone. Old Tom thinks you're a thief. I think you're either incredibly stupid or incredibly brave, and I haven't decided which." It was almost exactly what Mrs. Thorne had said. Elizabeth found herself laughing despite the pain in her hands. Everyone seems to be waiting for that verdict. "Well, we don't get much entertainment here. You'll have to forgive us for being curious." Maggie settled onto the floor beside her, apparently unconcerned about her own work. "So what was it? Bad marriage? Gambling debts? Are you secretly a spy?" "None of those things." "Then what could possibly make a lady, and you are a lady, don't bother denying it, run to the edge of the world with nothing but a carpet bag?" Elizabeth paused, the brush dripping soapy water onto the half-cleaned floor. What could she say that wouldn't sound absurd? That she'd fled because she'd overheard her fiancé's plans to use her as a bank account? That she'd chosen poverty over a loveless marriage to a duke? "I was supposed to marry a man who didn't love me," she said finally. "I chose not to." Maggie's eyes went wide. "That's it? That's the great scandal?" "In London, it's everything." "Well, you're not in London anymore," Maggie grinned. "Here, nobody cares who you were supposed to marry. They only care if you pull your weight." She stood, brushing off her skirts. "Come on, you're doing this all wrong, and Mrs. Thorne will have both our hides if these floors aren't done before dinner service." Over the following week, Elizabeth learned what real work meant. She hauled water from the well until her shoulders burned. She changed linens and scrubbed chamber pots and learned to build fires that actually stayed lit. Her hands, once soft and carefully tended, became raw and calloused. Her back developed a permanent ache. And slowly, impossibly, she began to feel stronger. Maggie became her unlikely guide to this new world, teaching her the rhythms of village life with the same matter-of-fact directness Mrs. Thorne employed. The fishermen who drank their pay every Friday, the farmers' wives who came for market day gossip, the unspoken hierarchies and alliances that governed small-town existence. "You're getting better," Maggie announced one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen garden behind the inn. "Your floors don't look like a blind woman scrubbed them anymore." "High praise indeed." Elizabeth sat back on her heels, surveying the rows of vegetables they'd been weeding. Her dress was mud-stained, her hair falling loose from its pins. She looked nothing like the girl who'd stood before a mirror in London while seamstresses fitted her wedding gown. She looked alive. "There's talk about you in the village," Maggie said carefully, pulling up a stubborn dandelion. "Some of it isn't kind." "What kind of talk?" "That you're trouble. That you'll bring whatever you're running from right to our doorstep." Maggie met her eyes. "Mrs. Patterson told the vicar's wife that respectable women don't abandon their families without cause. That you must have done something shameful." The word stung more than Elizabeth expected. She'd known there would be judgment, but hearing it articulated made her stomach clench. "And what do you think?" she asked quietly. Maggie considered this, her freckled face serious. "I think you were braver than most people ever are. I think you chose yourself over what was expected, and that scares people, especially people who've never had the courage to do the same." Tears pricked Elizabeth's eyes, the first she'd shed since arriving in Blackmore. "Thank you." "Don't get sentimental on me. We still have 3 more rows to weed before supper." But the talk continued. Elizabeth felt it every time she walked through the village, eyes following her, whispers trailing in her wake. The baker's wife who refused to serve her, The chandler who charged her twice what he charged locals. The subtle, constant reminder that she was other, unwelcome. 2 weeks into her new life, the situation escalated. Elizabeth was returning from the market, her arms full of vegetables for Mrs. Thorne's kitchen, when she heard raised voices from the village square. A crowd had gathered, unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. Curiosity drew her closer. At the center of the commotion stood a tall man on horseback, his bearing unmistakably aristocratic despite his travel-stained clothes. He was speaking to the village constable, his voice carrying clearly across the square. "I'm looking for a young woman, early 20s, blonde, well-spoken. She would have arrived within the past fortnight." Elizabeth's blood turned to ice. The vegetables tumbled from her arms, potatoes rolling across the cobblestones. The constable scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Well now, we don't get many strangers here. What's your interest in this woman?" "She's my cousin," the man said smoothly. "She left London in some distress, and her family is desperate to see her safely returned." A lie. Elizabeth knew it instantly, though she couldn't have said how. This man wasn't Victor. His build was different, his voice unfamiliar. But he'd been sent by someone looking for her, which meant her disappearance hadn't been quietly accepted as she'd hoped. Maggie appeared at her elbow, her hand closing around Elizabeth's wrist. "Come on," she hissed. "Now." They slipped through the crowd, keeping to the edges, making their way back toward the inn through side streets. Elizabeth's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "That was about you, wasn't it?" Maggie asked as they ducked into the inn's kitchen entrance. "Yes. Is he really your cousin?" "I've never seen him before in my life." Elizabeth sagged against the wall, trying to catch her breath. "But he's looking for me. Someone sent him." Mrs. Thorne appeared in the doorway, her face grave. "I heard. The whole village heard. That man made quite a scene. Elizabeth, child, what exactly are you running from?" The truth spilled out in a rush, the engagement, the overheard conversation, Victor's schemes, the wedding she'd abandoned 3 days before it was meant to take place. As she spoke, Mrs. Thorne's expression shifted from concern to something harder. "So you jilted a duke," the older woman said flatly. "And you thought you could hide here without consequences?" I hoped. You hoped that a man with money and power would simply let his bride disappear? That there wouldn't be search parties, investigators, people paid handsomely to drag you back?" Mrs. Thorne's voice was sharp with something that might have been fear. "Girl, you've brought a storm to our doorstep." "I'm sorry. I never meant—" "Sorry doesn't help us when that man starts asking questions, when he offers rewards for information. Do you know how poor this village is? How much a few pounds would mean to families struggling to feed their children?" Shame burned through Elizabeth. She'd been so focused on her own escape that she hadn't considered the people she might endanger. "I'll leave. Tonight. I won't put you in danger." "And go where?" Mrs. Thorne demanded. "You have no money, no plan, and now you know they're actively hunting you. You'll be found within a day." "Then what do I do?" Silence fell. Maggie looked between them, her young face troubled. Mrs. Thorne stared out the window toward the sea, her jaw working. "There might be another option," she said finally, "but it's not one you'll like. Tell me." "There's an estate north of here, Ashcroft Hall. The Earl lives there. Rowan Ashcroft. He's a strange one, keeps to himself mostly, doesn't come to village gatherings. But he's got no love for London society, that much I know. Turned his back on it years ago after some scandal." "You think he'd help me?" "I think he might understand what it means to run from that world." Mrs. Thorne turned to face her. "But it's a risk. He could just as easily turn you in for the reward. Or worse." Elizabeth's mind raced. Another aristocrat. Another man she'd be asking to trust with her safety. Everything in her screamed against it, but what choice did she have? The stranger in the square was asking questions, and someone in this desperate village would eventually talk. "How do I reach him?" "The estate is 5 miles up the coastal road. But you can't just walk up and knock on the door." Mrs. Thorne worried her lower lip. "Old Tom makes deliveries there twice a week. He's going tomorrow at dawn. I could get you into his cart, hidden among the supplies." "You'd do that for me? Even though I've brought trouble here?" Something softened in Mrs. Thorne's weathered face. "I was young once. I made my own run from a life that was killing me slowly. Difference is, I had help. She reached out and gripped Elizabeth's shoulder. You remind me of myself, girl, terrified but too stubborn to quit. I won't see you dragged back to a man who sees you as livestock. That night, Elizabeth lay awake in her small room, listening to the sea crash against the cliffs. Tomorrow she'd be leaving this place that had become the first real home she'd known, leaving Mrs. Thorne and Maggie, leaving the hard work that had made her feel capable for the first time in her life, leaving to throw herself on the mercy of a stranger who might be her salvation or her doom. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd fled to escape being bartered to a man she didn't know, and now she was running to another one, hoping he'd be different, hoping he'd be better. Dawn came too quickly. Elizabeth gathered her few possessions in the same leather bag she'd carried from London and met Mrs. Thorne in the kitchen. The older woman pressed a bundle into her hands: bread, cheese, dried meat. You'll need your strength, and take this. She held out a small knife in a leather sheath. Ashcroft's a good man as far as I know, but trust is earned, not given freely. Keep it hidden, but keep it close. Elizabeth tucked the knife into her boot, feeling its unfamiliar weight against her ankle. Thank you. For everything. Don't thank me yet. You're not safe until you're behind Ashcroft's walls, and even then, Mrs. Thorne shook her head. Be smart, Elizabeth. And if he turns you away, you come straight back here. We'll figure something out. Old Tom's cart waited in the pre-dawn darkness, loaded with sacks of grain and barrels of salt fish. He was a grizzled man of indeterminate age, his face a map of deep wrinkles, his eyes knowing. Mrs. Thorne tells me you need passage to Ashcroft Hall, he said without preamble. Tells me you're in trouble. Yes. Trouble with the law? No. Trouble with powerful people. Tom spat into the dirt. Powerful people are usually the worst kind of trouble. Get in the back, cover yourself with that tarp and stay quiet until I tell you otherwise. Elizabeth climbed into the cart, wedging herself between grain sacks. The canvas tarp smelled of fish and salt and years of hard use. Tom arranged it over her, blocking out the weak morning light. The cart lurched into motion. Elizabeth lay in darkness, breathing shallow, every bump in the road jarring her bones. Time became meaningless. It could have been an hour or 3 when Tom finally called out, We're here, don't move yet. The cart stopped. Elizabeth heard voices, Tom's gravelly tones and another man's, deeper and cultured, aristocratic. Just the usual supplies, my lord, Tom was saying. Grain, salt fish, some lamp oil from the chandler. Very good. Have the stable boys unload it. Tell Mrs. Thorne I'll settle the account at month's end as usual. The voice was educated but tired, lacking the polished affectation of London nobility. Elizabeth held her breath as footsteps approached the cart. Actually, Tom, there's something else in your shipment today, isn't there? Her heart stopped. Tom hesitated. My lord? I can see her breathing. The tarp moves with each breath. A pause. You can come out now, miss. There's no point in continued hiding. Elizabeth pushed aside the canvas and sat up slowly, squinting in the sudden brightness. She found herself looking at a man of perhaps 30, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore no jacket, just shirt sleeves and a waistcoat, thoroughly inappropriate for a lord receiving visitors. This was Rowan Ashcroft, Earl of Blackmore. He studied her with frank curiosity, no judgment in his gaze, just assessment. Well, you're not what I expected when Mrs. Thorne sent word last night that a fugitive needed sanctuary. She sent word? Elizabeth climbed awkwardly from the cart, her legs stiff from the journey. She did. A very cryptic message delivered by her son, saying only that a woman in danger would arrive with Tom's delivery and that I should hear her out before making any decisions. Ashcroft crossed his arms, leaning against the stone wall of what appeared to be a stable yard. So, I'm listening. As Elizabeth glanced at Tom, who nodded encouragement, then back at this strange earl who regarded her with such casual directness. In London, a lord would never stand in his stable yard in shirt sleeves talking to a runaway servant, but Ashcroft seemed unconcerned with propriety. She told him everything: the engagement, Victor's schemes, her flight, the man hunting her in Blackmore village. Ashcroft listened without interrupting, his expression revealing nothing. When she finished, silence stretched between them. A horse whinnied in the nearby stable. Gulls cried overhead, circling in the gray morning sky. "You jilted the Duke of Langley," Ashcroft said finally. 3 days before your wedding. Yes. Do you have any idea what kind of man Victor Langley is? A man who sees women as financial instruments. That's putting it mildly, Ashcroft pushed off from the wall. Langley's family is drowning in debt. Everyone in London knows it. But they're also vindictive and proud.
If you think he'll let this go, you're dangerously naive. I know. That's why I need help. Help? Ashcroft laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm the last person who should help you. Do you know why I live here instead of London? Why I turned my back on society? Elizabeth shook her head. Because I refused an advantageous marriage myself. Walked away from a woman my family had chosen. A merger of estates and titles that would have made the Ashcrofts one of the premier families in England. His voice went hard. They never forgave me. I'm a cautionary tale in drawing rooms across London, the Earl who chose principle over power. Why in heaven's name would I involve myself in another scandal? Because you understand, Elizabeth said quietly. You know what it costs to choose yourself over expectations. Something flickered in his storm-gray eyes. Understanding doesn't mean I'm foolish enough to make that choice again. Then turn me away. Let them find me. I won't blame you. She meant it. Standing in this foreign stable yard, facing this bitter stranger, Elizabeth suddenly felt the full weight of her exhaustion. She'd been running for weeks, fighting for weeks, and she was so tired. Ashcroft stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a real smile that transformed his severe features. You have more courage than sense, he said, exactly like I did at your age. He turned to Tom. Thank you for the delivery. Tell Mrs. Thorne the girl is safe. Tom tipped his cap and climbed back onto his cart, leaving Elizabeth alone with the Earl. Come on, then, Ashcroft said, gesturing toward the manor house that loomed behind the stables. A gray stone structure built to withstand coastal storms, imposing and isolated. We'll get you inside before anyone else from the village decides to come asking questions. But understand this, Miss Hawthorne. Elizabeth Hawthorne. Miss Hawthorne, I'm offering you refuge, not rescue. If Langley comes here, and he will eventually, I won't fight your battles for you. I'll give you shelter, but your safety is your own responsibility. It wasn't the heroic declaration she might have hoped for, but it was honest. Elizabeth found herself respecting him for that. I understand. Thank you. She followed him through a side entrance into the manor. The interior was surprisingly sparse. Good furniture, but minimal decoration. None of the ostentatious display wealthy families typically indulged in. They passed through corridors lined with family portraits whose subjects all shared Ashcroft's sharp features and storm-colored eyes. He led her to a sitting room where a fire burned against the morning chill. Wait here. I'll have the housekeeper prepare a room and bring tea. He left her alone. Elizabeth sank into a chair, her body suddenly remembering how little sleep she'd gotten, how frightened she'd been. She was safe. For now, at least, she was safe. When Ashcroft returned 20 minutes later, he carried a tea tray himself. No servants, she noticed. He poured 2 cups with practiced efficiency and handed her one. The housekeeper is preparing the East Wing guest room. It's private, away from the main house. You'll have your own entrance if you need to leave quickly. You've thought this through. I learned years ago that harboring runaways requires certain precautions. At her startled look, he shrugged. You're not the first person to seek refuge here, Miss Hawthorne. I have a reputation for taking in strays. Strays? She wasn't sure whether to be insulted or amused. People who don't fit, who chose to leave rather than be crushed by society's weight. He settled into the chair opposite her. What's your plan now? You can't hide here forever. I don't know, Elizabeth admitted. I didn't think beyond running. Then you'd better start thinking. Because Victor Langley won't stop looking, and when he finds you, notice I said when, not if, you'll need more than a good hiding place. The truth of his words settled over her like a shroud. She'd won herself time, but time wasn't freedom. Not really. I could disappear completely, she said slowly. Leave England. Go to America or France. With what money? What connections? You'd need passage, documentation, money to survive until you found work. Ashcroft shook his head. Running farther won't solve this. Langley has resources across Europe. You'd spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Then what do I do? You make him stop wanting to find you.
Elizabeth stared at him. How? That, Ashcroft said, leaning back in his chair with a grim smile, is what we're going to figure out. Make him stop wanting to find me. Elizabeth repeated Ashcroft's words slowly, testing their weight. You make that sound simple. It's not simple, but it's possible. Ashcroft rose and crossed to the window, looking out over the windswept grounds of his estate. Langley wants you for 2 reasons, your money and his reputation. We need to make both worthless to him. How? By giving him something he wants more. He turned back to face her, his expression calculating. Or by making the cost of pursuing you higher than the benefit. Elizabeth set down her teacup, her mind working through possibilities. If I could prove his intentions publicly, expose what he planned to do, you'd be the scorned woman making wild accusations against a duke. Society would crucify you, not him. Ashcroft's voice was matter of fact, not cruel. Men like Langley survive scandal. Women rarely do. The unfairness of it burned, but Elizabeth couldn't argue. She'd seen it herself in London, women ruined by rumors while the men who started them faced nothing worse than mild censure. Then I don't understand what options I have. Right now, very few, which is why you're going to stay here while we develop better ones. Ashcroft moved toward the door. The housekeeper will show you to your room. Rest. We'll talk more tomorrow when you're not dead on your feet. The dismissal was clear, but not unkind. Elizabeth followed him into the corridor where a severe-looking woman waited, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Mrs. Crawford will take care of you, Ashcroft said. If you need anything, ask her. The housekeeper led Elizabeth through a maze of corridors to the east wing. The room Ashcroft had mentioned was larger than her chamber at the Broken Anchor, furnished simply but comfortably. A fire already crackled in the grate. Lord Ashcroft said you'd need privacy, Mrs. Crawford said, her tone neutral.
This wing is separate from the main house. You can come and go through that door there without being seen. She pointed to a narrow door Elizabeth hadn't noticed. It leads to the gardens and the cliff path. Thank you. Mrs. Crawford studied her with sharp eyes. I don't know what trouble you're in, miss, and I don't need to know. But I'll tell you this, his lordship has a good heart, and people take advantage of that. Don't be one of them. The warning delivered, she left. Elizabeth sank onto the bed, exhaustion crashing over her. Through the window, she could see the ocean churning against black rocks, endless and indifferent. She'd traded one cage for another, however gilded this one might be. Sleep claimed her before she could finish the thought. She woke to afternoon light slanting through the windows and the sound of raised voices from somewhere below. Elizabeth crossed to the window and looked down to see Ashcroft in the courtyard, arguing with a man on horseback. Even from this distance, she recognized the rider, the stranger from Blackmore Village who'd claimed to be her cousin. Her heart hammered as she pressed closer to the glass, trying to hear. Appreciate your concern, Mr. Pembroke, but I've seen no young women matching that description. Forgive my insistence, Lord Ashcroft, but my employer is quite desperate. The girl is unwell, not in her right mind. Her family fears for her safety. Then I suggest you search elsewhere. As you can see, I keep a small household. Strangers would be noticed immediately. Pembroke, if that was even his real name, didn't move. I've been authorized to offer a reward, £100 to anyone who provides information leading to her recovery. £100. Elizabeth's stomach turned. That was more money than most villagers would see in 5 years, more than enough to buy loyalty. A generous sum, Ashcroft said coolly, but as I've told you, I cannot help. Good day, Mr. Pembroke. He turned and walked back toward the house, his posture rigid. Pembroke watched him for a long moment before finally wheeling his horse and riding back down the coastal road. Elizabeth stepped away from the window, her hands shaking. £100. Victor was serious. He wasn't going to let this go. A knock at her door made her jump. It's Ashcroft. May I come in? She opened the door to find him looking grim. You saw? I saw. He knows I'm here, doesn't he? He suspects.
Pembroke's been making inquiries throughout the region. Someone in the village must have mentioned that Tom made a delivery here this morning with unusual cargo. Ashcroft entered the room, closing the door behind him. We need to accelerate our timeline. What timeline? You said we'd develop a plan. That was before Langley put a price on your head large enough to tempt even loyal servants. He began pacing, his mind clearly racing. We need to change the situation entirely.
Make you unavailable to him. I'm already unavailable. I ran away. You're unmarried and unclaimed. In the eyes of the law, you're still your father's property until you marry or reach majority, which means Langley can petition to have you returned to your family's custody, especially if he convinces the authorities you're mentally unsound. Elizabeth felt the walls closing in again. Then what do I do? Ashcroft stopped pacing and looked at her directly. You marry someone else. The words hung in the air between them. Elizabeth stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? It's the only legal protection available. If you're married to another man, Langley has no claim on you. You'd be your husband's responsibility, not your father's. You're suggesting I escape one unwanted marriage by entering another? I'm suggesting you take control of the situation. Ashcroft's voice was steady, his storm gray eyes serious. Not a real marriage. A legal arrangement that protects you until we can find a more permanent solution. And who exactly would agree to marry a fugitive with no dowry and a duke hunting her? Ashcroft met her gaze without flinching. I would. Elizabeth's breath caught. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. Think about it logically. I have title and property, enough to make any legal challenge from Langley difficult and expensive. I have no need of your dowry since I've already walked away from fortune once, and I have no interest in a conventional marriage, which means you'd be free to live your own life. You'd tie yourself to a scandal just to help a stranger? I told you, I have a weakness for people who choose freedom over expectation. He crossed his arms. Besides, it's not entirely altruistic. Having a wife, even a wife in name only, would stop my family's endless attempts to marry me off to appropriate heiresses. Elizabeth's mind spun. It was insane, reckless, exactly the kind of bold, unconventional solution that might actually work. What would you expect from me in this arrangement? Nothing beyond discretion and mutual respect. You'd live here or elsewhere as you chose. No expectations of affection or duty beyond what the law requires. His expression softened slightly. I know what it's like to be trapped, Miss Hawthorne. I wouldn't create another cage for you. She wanted to believe him. Standing in this sparse room, looking at this strange earl who kept rescuing strays, Elizabeth wanted desperately to believe that such an arrangement could exist. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning. Pembroke will be back with authorities and a magistrate's order, if he can get one. We need to act before that happens. He left her alone with impossible choices. Elizabeth spent the evening pacing her room, weighing options that all felt equally dangerous. Marriage to a stranger versus capture and forced return to Victor. Freedom in name only versus the gilded cage she'd already escaped. Night fell. Elizabeth stood at the window watching the lighthouse beam sweep across dark water, its rhythm steady and hypnotic. What did she actually want? Not just escape from Victor, but from all of it. The expectations, the property laws that made her chattel, the society that gave her no voice in her own fate. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Mrs. Crawford with a dinner tray. His lordship thought you might be hungry. Elizabeth wasn't, but she accepted the tray. As Mrs. Crawford turned to leave, Elizabeth called out impulsively, How long have you worked for Lord Ashcroft? The housekeeper paused. 7 years, miss. And in that time, has he been unkind, cruel? Mrs. Crawford's stern face softened fractionally. His lordship is the best man I've ever served, fair, generous, and honest to a fault, but he's also deeply alone. She met Elizabeth's eyes. Whatever he's offered you, it's genuine. He doesn't make promises he won't keep. After she left, Elizabeth forced herself to eat. The food was simple but well prepared. Roasted chicken, vegetables from the estate gardens, fresh bread. Practical, real. Nothing like the elaborate 12-course dinners she'd endured in London. She made her decision somewhere between the chicken and the bread. At dawn, she found Ashcroft in his study, already dressed despite the early hour. He looked up from a pile of correspondence as she entered. "I'll do it," Elizabeth said without preamble. "I'll marry you." Relief flickered across his face, quickly masked. "You're certain?" "No, but I'm more certain of this than I was of marrying Victor." She moved closer to his desk. "I have conditions. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. I want to be useful, not a decoration or a burden. If I'm to live here, I need purpose." Ashcroft nodded. "The estate has a village, Ashcroft Hollow. It's struggling. The cottages need repairs, the school is barely functional, and the residents are suspicious of outside interference. If you wanted a project, I do." Elizabeth felt something spark in her chest. Purpose. Agency. What else? "If either of us finds someone we actually wish to marry, we dissolve this arrangement. Quietly and without scandal." "Agreed. Though I warn you, I'm done with marriage in any conventional sense." "As am I." Ashcroft stood and extended his hand. "Then we have an agreement, Miss Hawthorne. Shall we make it legal?" His hand was warm and calloused, nothing like Victor's cold, smooth grip. Elizabeth shook it firmly. "We shall." They married 3 hours later in the drawing room of Ashcroft Hall. The vicar from Blackmore Village performed the ceremony, clearly baffled by the haste, but unwilling to question an earl's decisions. Mrs. Crawford and the groundskeeper served as witnesses. The entire affair took less than 20 minutes. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife." Elizabeth Hawthorne became the Countess of Blackmore in a dress she'd scrubbed floors in, with no family present and no celebration planned. It should have felt hollow. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing she'd done in her entire life. Ashcroft, Rowan, she supposed she should call him now, signed the marriage certificate with a steady hand. Elizabeth signed below, her new name looking strange and foreign. Elizabeth Ashcroft. "I'll register this with the parish immediately," the vicar said, still looking confused. "And file the necessary documents with the county clerk?" "Please do," Rowan said, "and quickly. We expect visitors who will want to verify the marriage's legality." As if summoned by those words, shouting erupted from the front of the house. Rowan and Elizabeth exchanged glances. "That was faster than I anticipated," he muttered, striding toward the entrance hall. Elizabeth followed, her heart pounding. Through the open front door she could see Pembroke again, but this time he wasn't alone. 4 men accompanied him, including one whose official bearing suggested authority. "Lord Ashcroft," Pembroke's voice rang across the courtyard. "I have a magistrate's order to search your property for Miss Elizabeth Hawthorne. She's wanted for questioning regarding the theft of family assets and possible mental instability." "Convenient timing on that order," Rowan said quietly. Then, louder, "I'm afraid you're too late, Mr. Pembroke. There is no Miss Elizabeth Hawthorne on this property. You're harboring a fugitive." "I'm harboring my wife." Rowan's voice carried absolute authority. "Elizabeth Ashcroft, Countess of Blackmore, whom I married this morning in full accordance with the law. The vicar here can verify it." The vicar, still clutching the marriage certificate, nodded nervously. "It's true. I performed the ceremony myself not an hour ago." Pembroke's face went white, then red. "That's impossible. The Duke of Langley has no claim whatsoever on a married woman who is not his wife." Rowan descended the front steps, his posture radiating calm command. "You may inform the Duke that the lady he sought has made her choice, and that choice was not him. Now remove yourself from my property before I have you arrested for trespassing." The magistrate cleared his throat awkwardly. "If the marriage is legal—" "It is," the vicar confirmed, holding up the certificate. "Then I'm afraid there's nothing more to be done here." The magistrate shot Pembroke an apologetic look. "The lady is married. That changes everything legally." Pembroke's hands clenched into fists. "The Duke will not accept this." "The Duke has no choice," Rowan said flatly. "Tell him the Countess of Blackmore sends her regards." Elizabeth stepped forward, moving to stand beside Rowan. Pembroke's eyes locked on her, full of frustrated rage. "You've made a terrible mistake," he said directly to her. "His Grace is not a man who forgives such insults." "Then it's fortunate I'm no longer within his reach." Elizabeth's voice didn't shake. "You may also tell him that I know exactly what he planned. I know about the debts, the scheme, everything. If he persists in harassing me, I'll make certain all of London knows what kind of man he truly is." It was a bluff. She had no proof of Victor's intentions beyond her own overheard conversation, but Pembroke didn't know that. His face tightened. "This isn't over." "Yes," Rowan said quietly. "It is. Good day, Mr. Pembroke." They watched the men ride away, dust rising from the horses' hooves. Only when they disappeared down the coastal road did Elizabeth allow herself to breathe. "That was remarkably foolish," Rowan said, but he was almost smiling. "Threatening a duke with exposure based on nothing but hearsay? I needed him to believe I had leverage." "Do you?" "Not yet." Elizabeth turned to face him, this man who was now legally her husband. "But I will. I'm tired of running, Rowan. I want to fight back." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. "Then we'll fight. But first we survive." Pembroke was right about one thing. Langley won't let this go easily. He'll look for ways to challenge the marriage, to discredit us both. What can he do? We're legally married. He can claim coercion, insanity. He can spread rumors that will make our lives here unbearable. Rowan gestured back toward the house. "Welcome to your new life, Lady Ashcroft. It's going to be significantly more complicated than either of us anticipated." Over the following week, Elizabeth learned exactly how complicated. Letters arrived daily from London, some addressed to her, others to Rowan. Her father demanded her immediate return. Her mother wrote tearful accusations of betrayal. Victor himself sent a cold, formal note suggesting the marriage could be quietly annulled if she came to her senses. She burned them all in the drawing-room fireplace. But the letters were just the beginning. Rumors spread through the county like wildfire. The runaway bride who'd seduced an earl, the deranged woman who'd been married off before she could do more damage, the fortune hunter who'd trapped a reclusive lord. The villages turned hostile. Shopkeepers who'd been merely cool to Elizabeth now refused to serve her. Women whispered and pointed when she passed. Children threw stones at the Ashcroft carriage. "They'll come around," Rowan assured her one evening as they ate dinner in uncomfortable silence. "Once the scandal fades. And if it doesn't?" He had no answer for that. Elizabeth threw herself into the only thing she could control, the estate village. Ashcroft Hollow sat 2 miles inland from the main house, a collection of stone cottages in various states of disrepair. The residents were farmers and craftsmen, proud and wary of aristocratic interference. She arrived one morning with a notebook and a determination to be useful. The first cottage she approached belonged to a family named Garrett, a fisherman, his wife, and 4 children living in 3 rooms with a roof that leaked in 6 places. Mrs. Garrett answered her knock with suspicion. "Can I help you, my lady?" The title still sounded foreign. "I'm here to help you, actually. I understand the cottage needs repairs." "We manage." "I'm sure you do, but you shouldn't have to manage a leaking roof when the estate has the resources to fix it." Elizabeth gestured to the visible water damage. "If you'll allow it, I'd like to arrange for repairs. No cost to you." Mrs. Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Why? So his lordship can raise our rent to cover it?" "No rent increase." "I give you my word." "Your word? You're the scandalous woman from London who married his lordship in a hurry. Why should we trust you?" The blunt question caught Elizabeth off guard, but she appreciated the honesty. "You shouldn't. Not yet. I haven't earned that. But let me try." Over the following days, she visited every cottage in Ashcroft Hollow. Most residents met her with varying degrees of hostility. They didn't want charity from the disgraced countess. They didn't trust promises from aristocrats. They'd been disappointed too many times. But Elizabeth was persistent. She hired local craftsmen for repairs, paying fair wages. She arranged for the village school to receive new books and slates. She sat in cottage kitchens, drinking bitter tea and listening to complaints about crop yields and market prices and the impossible task of surviving on the edge of the world. Slowly, painfully slowly, the resistance began to crack. Mrs. Garrett was the first to thaw. Elizabeth found her hauling water from the well one afternoon and simply took the second bucket without asking permission. "You don't need to do that, my lady," Mrs. Garrett protested. "I know, but 4 buckets are easier to carry between 2 people than 1. They walked together in silence. At the cottage door, Mrs. Garrett paused. "The roof repair you arranged, it's good work. Hasn't leaked once since." "I'm glad." My husband says you paid the carpenter double the going rate. That true? The carpenter has 6 children and the work was excellent. He earned it. Mrs. Garrett studied her with new eyes. You're not what I expected. Neither was I, Elizabeth admitted. Word spread. The scandalous countess who carried water buckets and paid fair wages, who sat in muddy gardens discussing vegetable cultivation, who didn't flinch when children with dirty hands touched her dress. But acceptance from the village didn't shield her from London's reach. 6 weeks into her marriage, a letter arrived that changed everything. Elizabeth found Rowan in his study, staring at a single sheet of expensive paper with a London postmark. His face was ashen. What is it? He handed her the letter without speaking. Elizabeth read it once, then again, her hands beginning to shake. The letter was from Victor's solicitor. It formally challenged the validity of her marriage on the grounds that she had been mentally unfit to consent at the time of the ceremony. It cited her erratic behavior in fleeing London, her obvious emotional distress, and requested a formal hearing before the High Court to have the marriage annulled and Elizabeth remanded to her family's custody for medical evaluation. He's claiming I'm insane, Elizabeth whispered. It's a strategy, Rowan said tightly. If he can prove you weren't of sound mind when you married me, the marriage is void. You revert to being Elizabeth Hawthorne, subject to your father's authority, who will immediately hand you over to Langley. Can he actually succeed? With the right magistrate and enough money? Possibly. Probably. Rowan stood and began pacing. We'll need solicitors, good ones. This will be expensive and ugly and very, very public. Elizabeth's mind raced. A court hearing would mean returning to London, facing her family, being examined by doctors who would be paid to declare her unstable. Even if she won, the scandal would destroy what little credibility she'd built here. Unless. What if we gave them what they wanted? She said slowly. Rowan stopped pacing. Meaning? They want proof I'm of sound mind and made a rational choice. They want to discredit this marriage as impulsive and desperate. Elizabeth's thoughts crystallized into a plan, dangerous and bold and possibly brilliant. So we show them the opposite. We show all of London that I'm completely rational, thoroughly happy, and absolutely irreversibly committed to this marriage. How exactly do we do that? Elizabeth met his eyes. We go to London, together. We attend society functions, host dinners, behave like a devoted couple. We force them to acknowledge that I chose you freely and that this marriage is real. That's insane. London will eat you alive. London is already eating me alive from a distance. At least if I'm there, I can fight back. Elizabeth felt the old fear rising but pushed through it. I ran once. I won't run again. If Victor wants to destroy me, he'll have to do it to my face. Rowan stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed. A real laugh, full of genuine amusement. You know what? Why not? Let's show them exactly what kind of woman they tried to control. They began planning immediately. Rowan sent letters to old contacts in London, calling in favors and requesting invitations. Elizabeth worked with Mrs. Crawford to arrange appropriate wardrobes. She'd need gowns suitable for a countess, armor for the social battlefield ahead. The village learned of their plans, and reactions were mixed. Mrs. Garrett cornered Elizabeth at the general store. Is it true you're going back to London? Yes. To face the Duke who hunted you? Yes. Mrs. Garrett shook her head. That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the most foolish. I'm hoping for brave, Elizabeth said, but I'll settle for foolish if it means I control my own fate. To her surprise, Mrs. Garrett gripped her arm. Then you give them hell, my lady. Show those London bastards what Cornish women are made of. Elizabeth hugged her, uncaring of propriety. I will. 3 days before they were scheduled to leave for London, Elizabeth took a solitary walk along the cliff path. The wind was fierce, pulling at her hair and skirts, the sea below churning white against black rocks. This place had become her refuge, her first taste of real freedom. Leaving it felt like abandoning safety for war. She stood at the edge, looking out over the endless gray water, and made herself a promise. She would survive London. She would face Victor and her family and the entire weight of society's judgment, and she would emerge free, or she wouldn't emerge at all. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn. A rider approached along the cliff path, moving fast. As he drew closer, Elizabeth's blood ran cold. It was Victor himself. He reined in his horse 20 feet away, dismounting with practiced grace. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome, polished, every inch the powerful Duke. But now she could see the coldness in his blue eyes, the calculation in his smile. Elizabeth. He said her name like he owned it. Or should I say Lady Ashcroft, though we both know that title won't last much longer. Fear tried to choke her, but Elizabeth forced herself to stand straight.
You're trespassing, Your Grace. Lord Ashcroft's lands are private. Are they? How territorial. Tell me, does your husband know you're out here alone, unprotected, at the edge of a very dangerous cliff? He moved closer, and Elizabeth's hand instinctively went to the knife she still carried in her boot. Mrs. Thorne's gift, never forgotten. Stay back. Victor laughed. So fierce, I admit, I didn't expect this from you. The docile little bride who said yes to everything suddenly developing claws. Another step. But it doesn't matter, Elizabeth. I've already won. That court hearing will destroy your sham marriage, and then you'll come back where you belong. I belong to myself. No. His voice went hard. You belong to me. Your fortune belongs to me. Everything you are belongs to me because I needed it, and I claimed it first. He was close now, too close. Did you really think you could humiliate me, the Duke of Langley, in front of all society and face no consequences? Elizabeth's hand closed around the knife handle. You humiliated yourself by scheming to marry a woman for nothing but her money. And you ruined yourself by running. At least my schemes were practical. He reached for her arm. Come now. We can end this quietly. Annul the marriage to Ashcroft. Marry me as planned, and I'll ensure the scandal fades. Fight me, and I'll destroy not just you, but everyone you've come to care about. That village of peasants, that pathetic earl playing at sanctuary. Get away from her. Both of them turned. Rowan stood 20 yards back, a pistol in his hand pointed directly at Victor. Lord Ashcroft, Victor said smoothly, not releasing Elizabeth's arm. How dramatic. Tell me, are you truly prepared to shoot a duke over a woman you barely know? I'm prepared to shoot a man threatening my wife on my land. Rowan's voice was steady, but Elizabeth could see the rage in his eyes. Let her go. Now. Victor's grip tightened painfully on Elizabeth's arm. Or what? You'll make this even more of a scandal? You'll hang for murdering a peer? Perhaps, but you'll still be dead. For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind howled around them, the sea crashed below, and Elizabeth stood frozen between two men while her future hung in the balance. Then Victor smiled, that cold, calculated smile she'd seen in London, and released her arm. This isn't finished, he said quietly. See you in London, Elizabeth. I'll be the one watching your marriage collapse in front of the entire High Court. He remounted his horse and rode away without looking back. Elizabeth stood shaking, her arm throbbing where he'd gripped it. Rowan lowered the pistol and crossed to her quickly. Are you hurt? No, frightened, but not hurt. She looked at him, the stranger who'd become her unexpected ally. Thank you. We're leaving for London tomorrow, Rowan said grimly. Waiting 3 more days gives him time to plan. We go now, on our terms. Elizabeth nodded, still watching Victor's figure disappear down the coastal road. The fight she'd been preparing for had just become terrifyingly real. The journey to London took 2 days by train, and Elizabeth spent every mile remembering how to be the woman she'd left behind. Not the obedient daughter her parents had raised, but the polished society figure who could navigate drawing rooms and dinner parties with practiced ease. She would need that armor now more than ever. Rowan sat across from her in their first-class compartment, reviewing legal documents their solicitor had prepared. He looked up occasionally, catching her eye, offering silent support. They'd agreed on the train that they would present as a genuinely devoted couple. No half measures, no obvious pretense. London society could smell deception like blood in water. Tell me about your family, Elizabeth said as the countryside rolled past. If I'm to convince people this marriage is real, I should know more than just your name and title. Rowan set aside his papers. What do you want to know? Everything. Your childhood, your reasons for leaving London, why you became the reclusive earl everyone whispers about. He was quiet for a moment,
his storm gray eyes distant. My father died when I was 21, leaving me the title and an estate drowning in expectations. My mother immediately began parading suitable heiresses before me, women chosen for their connections and dowries, not for anything resembling compatibility. His voice went hard. One in particular, Lady Catherine Winters, beautiful, accomplished, daughter of a marquis, the perfect match according to every measure society valued. What happened? I spent 3 months being engaged to a woman I could barely tolerate. She was exactly what my family wanted and nothing I needed. So I broke the engagement 2 weeks before the wedding, returned to Cornwall, and told my mother she could keep her society marriages. Elizabeth understood now why he'd been so quick to help her. How did your family react? Poorly. My mother hasn't spoken to me in 5 years. My younger brother considers me an embarrassment. I'm the cautionary tale mothers use to frighten their sons into compliance. He smiled without humor. Welcome to the family you've married into, Lady Ashcroft. Better than the family I left behind. They arrived in London at dusk, the city's familiar coal smoke and noise washing over Elizabeth like a dark tide. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it. The grand townhouses, the gas-lit streets, the carriages carrying the wealthy to their evening entertainments. But she wasn't the same girl who'd fled from here. That girl had been afraid of scandal. This woman was walking straight into its heart. Rowan had retained a townhouse in Mayfair, smaller than the Hawthorne estate, but respectable. Its location prestigious enough to signal that the Earl of Blackmore, while eccentric, was still a force to be reckoned with. They settled in quickly, hiring minimal staff. Too many servants meant too many ears, too many potential sources of gossip. The Pemberton ball is tomorrow night, Rowan said over dinner that first evening. Lady Pemberton sent an invitation. She's known for being progressive. She'll provide a platform without being overtly hostile. And you think we should attend? Make our first appearance at a major social event? I think we should remind London that you're the Countess of Blackmore now, not some wayward girl to be pitied or scorned. He met her eyes across the table. Unless you've changed your mind about fighting. I haven't. Elizabeth straightened her shoulders. We'll go, and we'll make certain everyone sees exactly how united we are. The next day, Elizabeth prepared for battle. Mrs. Crawford had packed several gowns, but Elizabeth chose the most striking, deep emerald silk that set off her blonde hair and made her eyes look almost crystalline, bold, confident, nothing like the pastel demure colors her mother had always insisted upon. When she descended the stairs that evening, Rowan was waiting in the entrance hall. He wore formal evening attire, his dark hair finally properly cut, his bearing every inch the aristocratic earl. He looked at her and something shifted in his expression. You look formidable, he said. Good. That's exactly the impression I'm aiming for. The Pemberton residence blazed with light, carriages lined up outside disgorging London's elite. Elizabeth's hands trembled as their carriage joined the queue, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. She'd face down Victor on a cliff edge. She could face his friends in a ballroom. Rowan helped her down from the carriage, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm. Remember, he murmured as they approached the entrance, we're hopelessly devoted, completely besotted. Every touch, every glance should suggest we can barely stand to be apart. I'm not certain I know how to pretend that convincingly. Then don't pretend. Just stay close. Let me handle the worst of it. They entered together, and conversation stuttered to a halt. Every eye in the entrance hall turned toward them. Elizabeth felt the weight of that attention like physical pressure, but she kept her head high and her expression serene. Lady Pemberton swept forward, her curiosity barely disguised beneath social pleasantries. Lord Ashcroft, what a delightful surprise. We didn't expect you in London. Lady Pemberton. Rowan bowed slightly. May I present my wife, Elizabeth, Countess of Blackmore? Your wife? Lady Pemberton's eyes went wide with barely contained glee. My dear, the rumors have been absolutely flying, but I confess I didn't believe half of them. Married, and so suddenly? When one finds the right person, waiting seems rather pointless, Elizabeth said smoothly, the words she and Rowan had rehearsed. I'm very fortunate Lord Ashcroft was willing to overlook convention. Overlook convention? My dear girl, you've shattered it completely. But Lady Pemberton was smiling, the kind of delighted smile that suggested she found scandal more entertaining than appalling. "Come, you must tell me everything, though perhaps not everything. I suspect some details are better left to imagination." She led them into the ballroom, and Elizabeth felt every gaze tracking their movement. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. There, the runaway bride, the girl who jilted a duke, the scandalous countess. Elizabeth kept her hand on Rowan's arm and her spine straight. She'd expected hostility, but what she found was more complex. Curiosity mixed with judgment, fascination threaded through disapproval. Society loved scandal, even as it condemned those who created it. Elizabeth Hawthorne, or should I say Lady Ashcroft? Elizabeth turned to find Beatrice standing behind her, looking pale and uncomfortable in pink silk that washed out her complexion. Her cousin, her betrayer, the girl who'd helped Victor scheme to use her. "Beatrice." Elizabeth's voice came out colder than she'd intended. "I didn't expect to see you here. After everything." Beatrice's eyes darted around nervously. "Could we speak privately?" Rowan's hand covered Elizabeth's where it rested on his arm, a silent question. She nodded slightly. "5 minutes," Elizabeth said. "The terrace." They made their way through the crowd to the French doors leading outside. The terrace was blessedly empty, the night air cool against Elizabeth's heated skin. Beatrice followed, wringing her hands. "I'm sorry," she burst out before Elizabeth could speak. "I'm so terribly sorry. What Victor and I did, what I did, it was unforgivable." "Yes, it was." Elizabeth kept her voice level despite the anger rising in her chest. "You helped him plan to use me as a bank account. You pretended to be my friend while plotting with my fiancé." I know, and I've hated myself every day since." Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks. "But you have to understand. I loved him. I thought he loved me. He promised we'd be together after the wedding, that he just needed your money to keep you as his mistress while he paraded me as his duchess," Elizabeth finished. "I heard the entire conversation, Beatrice. I know exactly what he promised you." Beatrice flinched. "He lied to me too, you know. After you ran, after the scandal broke, he discarded me immediately, said I was a liability, that my involvement would only make things worse." Her voice broke. "He never loved me. I was just another tool to him, same as you." Elizabeth wanted to feel satisfaction at that admission, but all she felt was a weary kind of pity. "What do you want from me, Beatrice? Forgiveness?" "I want to help you." Beatrice grabbed her hands. "Victor is planning something for the court hearing. I don't know all the details, but I overheard him talking to his solicitor about finding doctors who would testify that you showed signs of mental instability even before the wedding. He's building a case that you were never fit to make your own decisions." Ice ran down Elizabeth's spine. "Do you have proof?" "Not proof exactly, but I know the names of the doctors he's contacted. I know he's been paying witnesses to claim they saw you behaving erratically." Beatrice pulled a folded paper from her reticule. "I wrote down everything I could remember, dates, names, the solicitor's office address." Elizabeth took the paper, scanning its contents quickly. This was valuable, potentially devastating to Victor's case if used correctly. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because I'm tired of being used. Because what we did to you was wrong, and I can't change that, but I can try to make it right." Beatrice met her eyes. "And because you deserve to be free, Elizabeth, more than I do, more than any of us do." Before Elizabeth could respond, footsteps sounded behind them. Both women turned to find Victor himself standing in the terrace doorway, his handsome features twisted with cold rage. "Beatrice, how touching. Betraying me just as thoroughly as you betrayed your cousin." He stepped onto the terrace, and Elizabeth instinctively moved backward. "Give me that paper, Elizabeth." "No. It's stolen property, private correspondence between me and my legal counsel. You have no right to it." "I have every right to defend myself against your schemes." Elizabeth folded the paper and tucked it into her bodice. "You can't stop this anymore, Victor. Your perfect plan is falling apart." His eyes went dangerous. "Is that what you think? That marriage to a disgraced earl protects you? I'll destroy that marriage and everyone associated with it. I'll see you declared mentally unfit and committed to an asylum, where you'll spend the rest of your life being treated for your delusions." "You'll do nothing of the sort." Rowan's voice cut through the tension like a blade.
He emerged onto the terrace, flanked by two other men Elizabeth didn't recognize. One was elderly and distinguished, the other younger with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Lord Ashcroft," Victor said smoothly, his expression shifting to polite contempt. "Come to defend your questionable marriage?" "I've come to introduce you to Lord Justice Pemberton," Rowan gestured to the elderly man, "who will be presiding over your petition for annulment, and Mr. Thomas Blackwell, the solicitor who will be representing Lady Ashcroft in those proceedings." Victor's composure cracked slightly. "You can't be serious."
"Lord Pemberton, surely you see this marriage as a farce." "What I see," Lord Justice Pemberton said in a voice like gravel, "is a young woman who made a legal marriage to an honorable man, and a duke who seems unusually invested in dissolving that marriage despite having no legal standing to do so." His eyes were sharp beneath bushy white brows. "Lord Ashcroft has been explaining the situation to me. Most illuminating. Everything I've done has been out of concern for Miss Hawthorne's well-being." "Lady Ashcroft," Elizabeth corrected coldly. "My name is Lady Ashcroft." "Her parents are desperate for her safe return." "Her parents," Rowan interjected, "have received multiple letters from their daughter explaining that she is safe, happy, and legally married. If they choose to ally with you in challenging that marriage, they're doing so against her explicitly stated wishes." Thomas Blackwell, the solicitor, stepped forward. "Your Grace, I'll be frank. The case you're attempting to build is legally shaky at best. Lady Ashcroft was of legal age to marry. There's no evidence of coercion, and 3 witnesses, including a respected vicar, will testify to her sound mind and clear consent. Your petition is unlikely to succeed." "Then we'll see what the court decides," Victor said tightly. "Indeed we will." Lord Justice Pemberton's expression was stern. "And I'll be very interested to hear your Grace's explanation for why you're so determined to invalidate another man's marriage. Some might consider such persistence questionable." Victor's jaw clenched. He looked at Elizabeth with pure hatred, then at Beatrice with contempt. "This isn't finished." "Actually," Elizabeth said quietly, "I think it is. You've lost, Victor. You just haven't accepted it yet." He left without another word, brushing past them back into the ballroom. Elizabeth sagged slightly, adrenaline draining away, leaving her shaking. Rowan was at her side immediately. "Are you all right?" "I confronted him. I actually confronted him and didn't back down." Elizabeth laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "I can't believe I did that." "You were magnificent," Rowan said, and there was something in his voice that made Elizabeth look at him sharply. Pride, certainly, but also something warmer, more personal. Lord Justice Pemberton cleared his throat. "Lady Ashcroft, your husband has briefed me on the situation. While I cannot make any promises about the court's decision, I can assure you that justice will be served fairly. The information your cousin provided will be very useful in demonstrating the Duke's, shall we say, less than honorable motivations." "Thank you, my lord." After the judge and solicitor had departed, Rowan turned to Beatrice. "You took a significant risk giving that information to Elizabeth. Langley won't forgive it." "I know." Beatrice looked small and lost in her pink gown. "I have nowhere to go, no prospects, and now I've made an enemy of a duke. But at least I did one honest thing." Elizabeth studied her cousin, this girl who'd betrayed her but who'd also just handed her the weapon she needed to fight back. Forgiveness would take time, if it came at all. But she understood desperation now in a way she never had before. "Come with us," she heard herself say. "To Cornwall. Work at Ashcroft Hall or in the village. It's not London, but it's honest work and no one there will judge you for past mistakes." Beatrice's eyes went wide. "You'd do that? After everything?" "I'm doing it for the girl you were before Victor corrupted you, and because I understand what it means to need a second chance." Elizabeth held out her hand. "Come with us or stay here. It's your choice. But choose yourself this time, not a man's promises." Beatrice gripped her hand tightly, nodding through tears. They returned to the ballroom together, and Elizabeth felt the shift in the crowd's attention. Word had spread about the confrontation on the terrace, about Lord Justice Pemberton's presence, about the Duke of Langley leaving in obvious fury. People were reassessing. Lady Pemberton approached with several other society matrons in tow. "Lady Ashcroft, You must introduce me to your husband properly. I've known Lord Ashcroft since he was a boy, but I confess I never expected to see him so devoted. Rowan played his part perfectly, his hand at the small of Elizabeth's back, his attention focused on her even while speaking to others. They moved through the ballroom as a united front, and Elizabeth found herself actually enjoying the performance. There was freedom in pretending to be madly in love. It gave her permission to touch him, to stand close, to share private smiles that made observers whisper. By midnight, the tide had shifted noticeably. Younger women approached Elizabeth with curiosity rather than disdain. Several matrons who'd known Rowan's family expressed approval of the match. The scandal was still there, but it was being reframed, from shameful flight to romantic rebellion. "You're a natural at this," Rowan murmured as they waltzed. He was an excellent dancer, leading with confidence that made it easy to follow. At pretending? At owning your story. You're not apologizing or hiding. You're making them see you the way you want to be seen. "We're making them see us," Elizabeth corrected. "This only works if they believe we're genuinely matched." His hand tightened slightly on her waist. "And what if it's not entirely pretense?" Elizabeth's breath caught. Before she could respond, the music ended. Rowan stepped back, bowing formally, the moment broken. They left the ball 2 hours later, Elizabeth exhausted but exhilarated. In the carriage, Beatrice dozed in the corner while Rowan reviewed notes the solicitor had given him. "Blackwell thinks we have a strong case," he said, "especially with Beatrice's testimony about Victor's schemes. The hearing is scheduled for next week. And if we lose, we won't." He met her eyes in the dim carriage light. "But if we do, we'll appeal. And keep appealing." "I meant what I said, Elizabeth. I won't let them drag you back." The hearing took place in a wood-paneled courtroom that smelled of old books and older money. Elizabeth sat beside Rowan at the defendant's table. She was technically the defendant in this case, her marriage on trial. Across the aisle, Victor sat with his own solicitors, his expression cold and confident. Her parents were there too, looking strained and uncomfortable. Her mother wouldn't meet her eyes. Lord Justice Pemberton called the court to order, and the Duke's solicitor began presenting his case. They called witnesses who testified to Elizabeth's supposed erratic behavior before the wedding. A seamstress who claimed she'd seemed distant and unfocused during fittings. A footman who swore she'd been crying in the garden. A doctor who'd never met Elizabeth but had reviewed reports of her behavior and concluded she showed signs of nervous hysteria. It was all fabricated or exaggerated, but it sounded convincing. Elizabeth's stomach churned as witness after witness painted her as an unstable, irrational girl incapable of making sound decisions. Then Thomas Blackwell began the defense. He called the vicar who'd performed the marriage, who testified to Elizabeth's clear, calm demeanor during the ceremony. He called Mrs. Thorne from the Broken Anchor, who'd traveled to London specifically to testify about Elizabeth's rational behavior and hard work during her time in Blackmore. He called Mrs. Garrett from Ashcroft Hollow, who described the organized, purposeful way Elizabeth had helped the village. "This is not the behavior of an unbalanced mind," Blackwell argued. "This is the behavior of a young woman who made a difficult but rational choice to escape an unwanted marriage and build a new life on her own terms." Then he called Beatrice to the stand. Victor's face went white as Beatrice was sworn in. She looked terrified, her hands trembling, but her voice was steady as she described overhearing Victor's conversation in the garden, his plans to use Elizabeth's fortune, his promise to keep Beatrice as a mistress, his cold assessment that Elizabeth was perfectly trained to be a compliant duchess. "He never loved her," Beatrice said, looking directly at Victor. "He needed her money and her compliance. When she refused to provide either, he decided to paint her as insane rather than accept that she'd chosen freedom over him." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Lord Justice Pemberton banged his gavel for order. Victor's solicitor tried to discredit Beatrice, calling her a scorned woman seeking revenge. But the damage was done. The narrative had shifted from unstable girl makes irrational choice to intelligent woman escapes scheming duke. Finally, Blackwell called Elizabeth herself to the stand. She walked to the witness box on shaking legs, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Looking out over the courtroom, she saw Victor's cold fury, her mother's tears, her father's discomfort, and Rowan, watching her with steady confidence. "Lady Ashcroft," Blackwell began, "please tell the court, In your own words, why you chose not to marry the Duke of Langley. Elizabeth took a breath and told her story, not with hysteria or melodrama, but with calm, clear honesty. She described the overheard conversation, the realization that she was valued only for her fortune, the choice she made to value herself more than social approval. I ran because staying would have meant surrendering myself completely to a man who saw me as property, she said. I married Lord Ashcroft because he offered me something the Duke of Langley never did: respect, partnership, the freedom to be myself rather than a decoration for his ambitions. And do you believe you were of sound mind when you made these choices? I believe I was more sound of mind than I'd ever been before. For the first time in my life, I was thinking clearly instead of simply obeying. Victor's solicitor cross-examined her, trying to paint her flight as impulsive and her marriage as desperate. But Elizabeth held her ground, answering each question with quiet firmness. When she stepped down from the witness box, she felt lighter. Whatever the court decided, she'd told her truth. Lord Justice Pemberton took only 20 minutes to deliberate. I've heard testimony from both sides, he said when court reconvened. The Duke's witnesses described behavior that, at worst, suggests a young woman experiencing normal pre-wedding anxiety. The defense has presented evidence of rational, purposeful action both before and after the marriage in question. He looked at Victor with barely concealed distaste. Furthermore, I'm troubled by the Duke's motivations for pursuing this petition. The evidence suggests his interest in Lady Ashcroft, was primarily financial. His determination to invalidate her current marriage appears rooted more in wounded pride than genuine concern for her welfare. Elizabeth's heart began to pound. Therefore, I find no grounds to annul the marriage of Lord and Lady Ashcroft. The petition is denied. The gavel fell with a sound like thunder. Elizabeth couldn't breathe. Rowan's hand found hers under the table, squeezing tightly. Across the aisle, Victor sat frozen, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. People were standing, talking, the courtroom dissolving into chaos. Elizabeth heard her mother crying, whether from relief or shame she couldn't tell. Her father simply looked old and defeated. Blackwell was shaking Rowan's hand, grinning. Well done, both of you. That was one of the cleanest victories I've seen in years. Outside the courthouse, newsboys were already crying headlines. Duke's petition denied. Runaway bride vindicated. Ashcroft marriage ruled valid. A crowd had gathered, and as Elizabeth and Rowan emerged, something unexpected happened. Someone began to applaud. Then another person. Then another. Within moments, a section of the crowd was actually cheering, mostly women, Elizabeth noticed. Women who perhaps saw something of their own trapped circumstances in her story. They're cheering for you, Rowan said, sounding amazed. For us, Elizabeth corrected, for the idea that we can choose ourselves. A woman pushed forward from the crowd, young, well-dressed, her eyes bright with tears. Thank you, she said simply. Thank you for showing us it's possible. Elizabeth gripped her hand. It's possible. It's terrifying, but it's possible. They made their way to their carriage through a gauntlet of well-wishers and scandal-mongers alike. As they climbed inside, Elizabeth caught one last glimpse of Victor standing on the courthouse steps, surrounded by his solicitors, his expression promising that while he'd lost this battle, the war wasn't over. But for now, for this moment, Elizabeth had won. She was legally, irrevocably, the Countess of Blackmore. Her marriage was valid. Her choice had been upheld by the law. The carriage lurched into motion, carrying them away from the courthouse toward their Mayfair townhouse. Beatrice sat across from them, looking dazed. What happens now? She asked. Rowan and Elizabeth exchanged glances. Now, Elizabeth said, feeling something like joy unfurling in her chest for the first time in months. We go home to Cornwall, and we figure out what freedom actually looks like. The journey back to Cornwall felt different from every other journey Elizabeth had made. She wasn't running this time. She was returning to a place she'd chosen, to a life she'd built, to a version of herself she'd fought to become. Rowan sat across from her in the train compartment, reading a newspaper that featured their court victory on the front page. Beside him, Beatrice stared out the window at the passing countryside, her expression somewhere between anxious and hopeful. Are you certain about this? Beatrice asked for the third time since leaving London. Taking me to Cornwall? I could find work in London. I don't need to be a burden. You're not a burden, Elizabeth said firmly. You gave us the weapon we needed to fight Victor. That counts for something. It doesn't erase what I did before. No, it doesn't. But people are more than their worst moments. Elizabeth met her cousin's eyes. You get a second chance, Beatrice. What you do with it is up to you. The train pulled into Blackmore Station just as dusk fell. Elizabeth stepped onto the platform and breathed in the salt air, feeling something in her chest unclench. London had been necessary. She'd needed to face her past and claim her victory. But this was home. Old Tom was waiting with his cart, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile when he saw them. Heard you gave London quite the show, my lady. Word travels fast. Mrs. Thorne's been reading every newspaper she can get her hands on. The whole village knows. He loaded their trunks with practiced efficiency. Some of them still don't trust you, mind, but most are coming around. They rode through the darkening landscape, and Elizabeth watched Ashcroft Hall emerge from the coastal gloom like a promise. Not a grand palace, but something better. A real place where real work happened, where she could be useful instead of ornamental. Mrs. Crawford met them at the door, her severe face softening when she saw Elizabeth. Welcome home, my lady, Lord Ashcroft. Miss Beatrice Winters, Elizabeth introduced. She'll be staying with us. Can you prepare a room in the west wing? Of course. Mrs. Crawford's sharp eyes assessed Beatrice quickly. Can you cook or clean, girl? Beatrice straightened her shoulders. I can learn. Good. We can always use another pair of hands. The housekeeper gestured them inside. Dinner's ready when you are. Nothing fancy. I didn't know when you'd arrive. The simple meal tasted better than any elaborate London dinner. Elizabeth found herself relaxing in a way she never could in their Mayfair townhouse, the tension of performance finally draining away. After dinner, Rowan excused himself to his study to review estate business. Beatrice retired early, exhausted from the journey and the emotional weight of the past week. Elizabeth found herself alone in the drawing room, watching the fire and trying to process everything that had happened. She'd won, actually won. Victor's petition had been denied, her marriage validated, her choices upheld by law. She should feel triumphant. Instead, she felt unsettled. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Rowan entered without waiting for permission, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. You look like you could use this, he said, handing her one. Elizabeth took it gratefully, the amber liquid burning pleasantly down her throat. Thank you for everything, the hearing, the support, the... Don't. He settled into the chair opposite her. We had an agreement. I held up my end. It was more than an agreement, and you know it. Elizabeth studied him in the firelight. You didn't have to stand against a duke for me. You didn't have to risk your own reputation. My reputation was already ruined by my own choices. Defending yours cost me nothing I valued. He paused, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Besides, I meant what I said in London. Watching you refuse to be diminished, it reminded me why I left that world in the first place. Silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Elizabeth found herself acutely aware of him, the way firelight caught in his dark hair, the strength in his hands, the quiet intensity of his presence. This marriage had started as pure practicality, a legal shield against Victor's schemes. But somewhere along the way, it had become something else. What happens now? She asked quietly. We've won the legal battle. We've convinced London society that this marriage is legitimate. We can dissolve the arrangement if you want, quietly. I have my title and protection. You've stopped your family's matchmaking attempts. We've both gotten what we needed. Rowan looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Is that what you want? To dissolve this? Elizabeth's heart hammered. I'm asking what you want. I want to know if what we performed in London was entirely performance. His voice was low, careful. Because for me, somewhere between the courthouse and the Pemberton ball, it stopped feeling like pretense. The admission hung in the air between them. Elizabeth set down her whiskey glass with trembling hands. I don't know how to do this, she confessed. I spent my whole life learning how to be the perfect society wife, decorative and silent and obedient. Then I learned how to be free and independent, but I don't know how to be this, whatever this is.
Neither do I. Rowan leaned forward. But I know I'd rather figure it out with you than go back to being alone in this house, watching the sea and wondering what might have been possible. Elizabeth crossed the space between them before she could overthink it, kneeling beside his chair. I never thanked you properly, for seeing me as more than a problem to solve.
For treating me like an equal when the law said I was property. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. You were never property, Elizabeth. You were always yourself, fierce and brilliant and utterly terrifying in the best possible way. She kissed him then, and it was nothing like the cold, perfunctory kiss Victor had given her when they'd become engaged. This was heat and choice and mutual desire, the kind of connection she'd never imagined possible. When they finally broke apart, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. So, not dissolving the arrangement, then? Elizabeth laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. Definitely not dissolving it. Over the following weeks, Elizabeth threw herself into transforming Ashcroft Hollow with renewed purpose. The court victory had given her confidence, and she used it to push harder for the changes the village needed. She organized a meeting in the village hall, inviting every resident to discuss what improvements mattered most. The turnout was better than expected. Curiosity about the countess who'd defied a duke drew even the most skeptical villagers. I know many of you still don't trust me, Elizabeth began, standing before the assembled crowd. I'm from London. I married your lord under unusual circumstances, and I've only been here a few months, but I'm not going anywhere. This is my home now, and I want to make it better, not because I think I know what's best for you, but because you do. So tell me, what does this village need? Silence for a moment. Then Mrs. Garrett stood. The school roof leaks, has for 3 years. When it rains hard, we can't hold classes. The bridge over Hollow Creek is rotting through, a farmer added. Cost us 2 sheep last month when they fell through. Market Road's so rutted, carts break axles regularly, someone else called out. Elizabeth wrote everything down, filling pages with specific practical needs. Not grand gestures, but real solutions to real problems. When the meeting ended 2 hours later, she had a comprehensive list, and more importantly, she had the village's cautious participation. She took the list to Rowan that evening. I need funding, quite a lot of it. He reviewed her notes, his expression thoughtful. This is ambitious. The school alone will cost hundreds of pounds. I know, but it's necessary. Elizabeth met his eyes. I have my dowry. It's legally mine now that we're married, and I want to use it for this. Your fortune was supposed to give you independence. It is giving me independence. The independence to choose what matters to me. She gestured to the list. This matters. These people matter. I want to invest in them, not in gowns and jewels I don't need. Rowan studied her for a long moment, then smiled. That real smile that transformed his severe features. You're remarkable. You know that? I'm practical. You're both. He signed authorization for the funds. Build your village, Elizabeth. Show them what's possible when someone actually gives a damn. Construction began immediately. Local craftsmen were hired at fair wages, creating jobs and goodwill simultaneously. The school roof was repaired first. Elizabeth had promised Mrs. Garrett, and she kept her promises. Then the bridge, reinforced and widened, then the market road, graded and graveled properly. Elizabeth was present for every project, not just observing, but participating. She learned to mix mortar, to measure boards, to understand the practical mechanics of building. Her hands, already calloused from in-work, became even rougher. Her dresses accumulated permanent stains. She looked nothing like a countess, and everything like someone who belonged. Beatrice found her own place in this new world, working alongside Mrs. Crawford and gradually earning the housekeeper's grudging respect. She was quieter than she'd been in London, more thoughtful, as if the experience with Victor had burned away her frivolous edges and left someone more substantial behind. I never thanked you properly, Beatrice said one afternoon, as she and Elizabeth worked together in the kitchen garden. For giving me this chance. You're thanking me by taking it seriously. That's enough. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? Really forgive me? Elizabeth paused, considering. I think forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a choice you make repeatedly, over time. Right now, I'm choosing to see who you're becoming instead of who you were. Ask me again in a year. Beatrice nodded, accepting that.
Fair enough. 2 months after their return from London, a letter arrived that changed everything. Elizabeth opened it at breakfast, scanning the contents with growing disbelief. "It's from my father," she said, her voice strange. Rowan looked up from his own correspondence. "What does he say?" "He wants to visit. He and my mother both." Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly. "He says they want to apologize, that they've had time to think about everything that happened, and they realize they were wrong." "Do you believe him?" "I don't know." Elizabeth reread the letter. "He sounds different, less authoritative, almost humble." She met Rowan's eyes. "Should I let them come?" "That's your decision, not mine." Elizabeth thought about it for the rest of the day. She'd been so angry at her parents for trying to force her into a marriage with Victor, for siding with him during the court hearing, for valuing social standing over her happiness. But anger was exhausting to carry, and she'd built too much here to let old bitterness poison it. She wrote back that evening, inviting them to visit in 3 weeks' time. When Jonathan and Margaret Hawthorne arrived at Ashcroft Hall, they looked smaller than Elizabeth remembered. Her father's hair had gone grayer, her mother's face more lined. They stood in the entrance hall looking uncertain, a far cry from the commanding presence they'd projected in London. "Elizabeth," her mother began, tears already forming. "My dear girl, Let's sit down," Elizabeth said, not ready for emotional declarations in the foyer. "We have much to discuss." In the drawing room, her parents settled stiffly on the sofa while Elizabeth and Rowan took chairs opposite. An awkward silence stretched. Finally, Jonathan Hawthorne spoke. "We were wrong about Langley, about the marriage, about what we wanted for you versus what you wanted for yourself." He looked directly at Elizabeth, and she saw genuine regret in his eyes. "I told myself I was protecting you, securing your future, but I was really just following convention without questioning whether it was right." "We both were," Margaret added. "When you ran, I was so focused on the scandal, on what people would say, that I never stopped to consider why you'd felt running was your only option." She wiped at her eyes. Then at the hearing, listening to Beatrice describe what that man had planned, how he'd intended to use you, I realized we'd been ready to sacrifice you to a monster just to maintain our social standing. "You sided with him even after you knew the truth," Elizabeth said quietly. "You stood there in court while he tried to have me declared insane." "I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Her father's voice broke. "I'm not asking you to forgive us immediately, but I'm asking for the chance to know the woman you've become, instead of the daughter we tried to mold you into." Elizabeth looked at Rowan, who gave her a slight nod. "Your choice," his expression said. She turned back to her parents. "I've changed," she told them. "I'm not the girl who stood silent at dinner parties and agreed with everything you said. I have opinions now. I make my own decisions. I work with my hands, and I care about people you'd consider beneath us." "We know," her mother said. "We read about the village improvements in the newspapers, about the school and the bridge, and how you're transforming Ashcroft Hollow." "The papers made it sound quite noble," her father added. "But I suspect the reality is messier and harder and more real than their romanticized versions." "It is," Elizabeth confirmed. "It's muddy and exhausting and nothing like the life you raised me for, and I love it, every difficult, unglamorous moment of it." "Then show us," her mother said. "Show us this life you've built. Help us understand." Over the next 3 days, Elizabeth did exactly that. She took them to Ashcroft Hollow, introduced them to Mrs. Garrett and the other villagers, showed them the repaired school where children now learned without rain pouring through the roof. She brought them to the construction sites, let them see her in work-stained clothes directing repairs. Her mother wept when she saw Elizabeth helping to build a new cottage for a family whose old one had partially collapsed. Her father stood speechless, watching his daughter, the girl he'd raised to be ornamental, calculate load-bearing requirements with the head carpenter. On their final evening, they gathered in the drawing room for dinner. The atmosphere was easier now. Some of the initial tension dissolved. "You've built something remarkable here," Jonathan said. "Not just the physical improvements, but the community. People respect you. Actually respect you, not just defer to your title." "They respect the work," Elizabeth corrected. "The title means nothing here, only what you contribute."
Margaret reached across the table to grip Elizabeth's hand. I wish I'd taught you this instead of deportment and
Needlework, how to find purpose beyond appearance, how to measure worth beyond social approval. You taught me what you knew, Elizabeth said gently. I had to discover the rest myself. Before they left the next morning, her father pulled her aside. I've been thinking about your dowry, the 50,000 pounds. Legally, it's Lord Ashcroft's property now, since you're married. Actually, Rowan interjected, appearing in the doorway, I had my solicitor draw up papers returning full control of those funds to Elizabeth. They're hers to use as she sees fit. He handed Elizabeth a legal document. I signed them last week. The money is entirely yours. Elizabeth stared at the papers, then at Rowan. You're giving me control of my own fortune? I'm acknowledging that it was always yours. The law might say it became mine through marriage, but laws can be unjust. You earned that money through what you endured, and you should decide how it's used. Her father looked between them, something like wonder on his face. You found a good man, Elizabeth, better than I ever knew to look for on your behalf. I found a partner, Elizabeth corrected. Someone who sees me as an equal, not property. Her parents departed with promises to visit again, and Elizabeth stood on the front steps watching their carriage disappear down the coastal road. Rowan came to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. That went better than expected, he observed. They're trying. That's more than I thought possible a few months ago. Elizabeth leaned against him. Thank you for the trust fund papers. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. This only works if we're actually equals, not just performing equality for society's benefit. Elizabeth turned to face him, this man who'd started as a stranger offering sanctuary and become something infinitely more precious. I love you. I don't think I've said that explicitly. His arms came around her. I love you too. Somewhere between watching you scrub floors at the Broken Anchor and watching you face down Langley in court, I fell completely. We're terrible at conventional romance, Elizabeth laughed. Our marriage started as a business arrangement. Our courtship happened backward, and our grand declaration of love is happening on the front steps instead of somewhere appropriately dramatic. I think it's perfect. Rowan kissed her forehead. Nothing about us has been conventional. Why start now? That winter was the harshest in years, storms battering the Cornish coast with relentless fury. But Ashcroft Hollow survived better than neighboring villages, its repaired buildings weathering the winds, its reinforced bridge standing firm against flooding. When spring came, Elizabeth proposed her most ambitious project yet, a village cooperative where residents could pool resources, share equipment, and sell their goods collectively for better prices. The idea was met with skepticism initially. That's socialist thinking, one of the older farmers declared at the town meeting, not how things have been done. No, it's practical thinking, Elizabeth countered. Individually, you're at the mercy of merchants who set unfair prices because you have no leverage. Together you have bargaining power. It's not about politics, it's about survival. Mrs. Garrett stood. I'll join. My lady's ideas haven't failed us yet. One by one, other villagers agreed. The cooperative formed, with Elizabeth providing initial capital and organizational structure, then stepping back to let residents run it themselves. She'd learned that real change happened when people owned the solutions, not when nobility imposed them. By summer, the cooperative was turning a profit, and neighboring villages were sending delegations to learn how it worked. Elizabeth found herself hosting regular meetings, teaching other communities how to organize, how to pool resources, how to advocate for themselves. Word spread beyond Cornwall. Newspapers began writing about the radical countess transforming rural life. Some articles were critical, accusing her of dangerous socialist sympathies. Others were admiring, calling her a model of progressive aristocratic responsibility. Elizabeth didn't care about either characterization. She cared about Mrs. Garrett's daughter, who could now afford school supplies, about the Thompsons who'd rebuilt their cottage with cooperative funds after a fire, about the tangible, measurable improvements in people's daily lives. One afternoon in early autumn, nearly a year after her flight from London, Elizabeth stood on the cliffs overlooking the sea. The wind pulled at her hair, and salt spray misted her face. She thought about that terrified girl who'd run from her wedding, who'd known only how to be decorative and obedient. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone who'd learned to be useful, to be strong, to fight for what mattered. Someone who'd discovered that freedom wasn't the absence of constraint, it was the presence of choice. Footsteps on the cliff path announced Rowan's arrival. He came to stand beside her and they watched the waves together in comfortable silence. "There's a letter from London," he said eventually, "from the Marchioness of Waverley. She wants to visit, learn about our village projects. Apparently several aristocratic women are forming a society dedicated to estate reform, and they want you to speak at their inaugural meeting." Elizabeth laughed. "They want the scandalous runaway bride to tell them how to manage their properties? They want the woman who proved it's possible to choose differently and survive." He handed her the letter. "You've become something of a symbol, whether you intended to or not. And if I speak to them, if I encourage other women to question their arranged marriages, to demand equality, to value purpose over appearance, then you'll probably inspire a minor revolution in drawing rooms across England." Rowan grinned. "Sounds perfectly appropriate for the woman who jilted a duke 3 days before the wedding." Elizabeth read the letter, considering. A year ago, the thought of returning to London society would have terrified her. Now it felt like an opportunity, not to reclaim her place in that world, but to offer alternatives to women still trapped in it. "I'll do it," she decided. "On my terms. I'm not going back as a supplicant asking for acceptance. I'm going as someone with solutions they might actually need." That evening, she sat down to write her speech. Not a defensive justification of her choices, but a clear articulation of what she'd learned. That security without freedom was just a prettier cage. That duty without choice was just servitude. That the rules society claimed were immutable could actually be changed by those brave enough to challenge them. The speaking engagement was scheduled for December. Elizabeth and Rowan traveled to London together, and this time there was no pretense, no performance. They were simply themselves, partners who'd chosen each other and built something real together. The Marchioness of Waverley's townhouse was packed with aristocratic women, all ostensibly there to discuss charitable work and estate management. But Elizabeth could see the hunger in their eyes, the same desperation she'd felt in that London drawing room a year ago. She stood before them and told her story, not sanitized or romanticized, but honest. The fear, the doubt, the moments when she'd wanted to surrender and return to the easier path. The work that had blistered her hands and broken her back. The slow, difficult process of earning trust and building community. "I'm not suggesting everyone should run away," she concluded, "but I am suggesting you should have the right to choose, to say no to marriages that diminish you, to demand partnerships instead of ownership, to value your own judgment over society's expectations." She paused, meeting eyes throughout the room. "And if you choose to stay in conventional marriages, let it be an active choice, not passive acceptance. Know your worth. Claim your agency. Build something that matters to you." Silence fell when she finished. Then Lady Catherine Winters, the woman Rowan had jilted years ago, stood and began to applaud. Others joined her, and within moments the entire room was on its feet. Afterward, women crowded around Elizabeth, asking questions, sharing their own stories of frustration and trapped dreams. Catherine pulled her aside. "Thank you," she said simply, "for doing what I lacked the courage to do. Rowan breaking our engagement was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to examine what I actually wanted versus what I'd been told to want. I ended up marrying a historian with no title and modest means, and I've never been happier." "I'm glad," Elizabeth said sincerely. "We both deserved better than marriages of pure convenience." "So did Rowan, and it seems he found it," Catherine smiled. "You're good together, real. That's rarer than society wants to admit." The drawing room revolution Elizabeth inspired didn't happen overnight, but seeds were planted that evening, ideas that would grow and spread, challenging the assumption that women's lives should be determined entirely by fathers and husbands. Elizabeth and Rowan returned to Cornwall in time for the new year. A coating of snow covered Ashcroft Hall, and lights glowed in the village cottages below. The cooperative had sent word that they'd exceeded their profit projections, and were planning to expand into wool processing the following year. On New Year's Eve, they hosted a celebration at the hall for everyone who'd worked on the village projects. The drawing room filled with farmers and craftsmen, women in practical dresses instead of silk gowns, children running through corridors that had stood silent for too long.
Mrs. Garrett found Elizabeth in the kitchen, where she was helping Mrs. Crawford arrange food. "You've done something extraordinary here, my lady. This time last year, half these families were wondering how they'd survive the winter. Now look at them." "We did it together," Elizabeth corrected. "I just provided resources and organization. You all did the real work." "No," Mrs. Garrett gripped her arm. "You gave us something more important than money. You gave us the belief that we could change things, that we weren't just stuck accepting whatever circumstances handed us." She smiled. "You showed us what freedom looks like when you're brave enough to claim it." As midnight approached, Elizabeth stood at the drawing room window watching snow fall over the coastal landscape. Rowan came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "Deliriously." Elizabeth leaned back against him. "I never imagined happiness could feel like this. So solid and real and earned. Earned is right. You've worked harder this year than most people do in a lifetime." It didn't feel like work. It felt like becoming. Elizabeth turned in his arms. "When I ran from London, I thought I was just escaping, but I was actually running toward this, toward purpose and partnership and a life I could respect." The clock began to chime midnight, and the room erupted in celebration. Elizabeth kissed Rowan as the new year arrived, surrounded by people who'd become her community, her chosen family. She thought briefly of Victor, somewhere in London nursing his wounded pride and diminished prospects. The scandal of being jilted had damaged his reputation more than he'd anticipated, and the court hearing had exposed his financial schemes. Last she'd heard, he'd been forced to sell several properties to cover debts. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only indifference. He'd lost all power to hurt her the moment she'd stopped letting his opinion matter. Spring brought new challenges and new triumphs. The cooperative expanded successfully. The village school added a second teacher. 3 more families moved to Ashcroft Hollow, drawn by its reputation as a place where hard work was rewarded and innovation encouraged. And in April, Elizabeth discovered she was pregnant. She told Rowan one evening as they walked the cliff path that had become their private sanctuary, "We're going to have a child, probably in late autumn." He stopped walking, his expression cycling through shock, joy, and something like terror. "A child. Our child. Are you pleased?" "Terrified," he admitted. "But yes, absolutely pleased." He pulled her close. "This child will have what we didn't. Parents who value their choices, who see them as autonomous people, not property or disappointments. This child will have muddy knees and calloused hands from real work," Elizabeth added. "And they'll know that their worth isn't determined by who they marry or what title they inherit, but by what they contribute and who they choose to be." Their daughter was born in October during a fierce coastal storm, arriving with her father's dark hair and her mother's determination. They named her Rowan, after her father, but called her Wren, a small bird with a powerful voice. Holding her hours-old daughter, Elizabeth thought about the life stretching ahead. This child would grow up with freedom that Elizabeth had had to fight for. She'd make her own choices, pursue her own dreams, define her own worth, not because society granted her that right, but because her parents would ensure she understood it belonged to her inherently. "What are you thinking?" Rowan asked, watching mother and daughter with unguarded tenderness. "That I almost missed this. If I'd been too afraid to run, if I'd married Victor and spent my life as his decorative duchess, I would never have known any of this was possible." Elizabeth looked up at him. "I would never have known you, or this version of myself, or what love actually feels like when it's chosen instead of arranged. I would have stayed alone in this house, watching the sea, never knowing that partnership could be this extraordinary." Wren made a small sound, and they both laughed. Outside, the storm battered the windows, but inside Ashcroft Hall, everything was warm and safe and real. Years would pass. Wren would grow up helping in the village, learning that titles meant less than character and that work was something to take pride in, not avoid. The cooperative would expand to 6 villages, transforming the regional economy. Elizabeth would write a book about practical estate management that would become required reading for progressive landowners across England. Rowan would serve in Parliament, advocating for legal reforms that gave married women more control over their own lives and property. But in that moment, holding her newborn daughter while storm winds howled outside, Elizabeth Ashcroft,
Once Elizabeth Hawthorne, the runaway bride who'd jilted a duke, felt only profound gratitude. She'd chosen freedom over security, unknown possibilities over guaranteed comfort, herself over expectations.
And in doing so, she'd discovered that the life she built was infinitely more valuable than the life she'd been offered. The gilded cage had shattered, and from its ruins, Elizabeth had built something lasting. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A real life, earned through courage and choice, and the stubborn insistence that she deserved more than she'd been told to accept. Outside, the storm began to ease. Dawn light filtered through breaking clouds, painting the sky in shades of silver and gold. Elizabeth looked down at her sleeping daughter, then up at Rowan, then out the window toward Ashcroft Hollow and the sea beyond. This was her kingdom now, not inherited through bloodlines or acquired through marriage contracts, but claimed through determination and built with her own scarred hands. And she would defend it, nurture it, and pass it on to her daughter, not as property to be managed, but as proof of what became possible when a woman chose herself and refused to settle for less than she deserved. The girl who'd run from London was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd learned that freedom wasn't something granted by others. It was something you took, something you fought for, something you built piece by piece until it became unshakable. Elizabeth had earned her freedom, and nothing, no duke, no scandal, no society's censure, would ever take it away again.